Welcome back to Market on Close. Nvidia continues to feel the pressure this year after Huawei announced plans to develop, or reportedly announced plans to develop, a new high-end chip that hopes will compete with the semiconductor leader. For reaction to the news or to these reports from the Wall Street Journal, let's welcome in Olivier Blanchard, research director at the Futurum Group. Olivier, I believe these are still just Wall Street Journal reports here. We kicked off the show talking about weakness in Nvidia because of the threat of this AI chip from Huawei. Nvidia did close down more than 2% today. How big of a threat is this, or could this be?
Hey, well, first, thanks for having me. Well, it's a significant threat, but I think that the real question is, when does it become a threat, right? So I think that if we take a step back and look at the way that the U.S. has been trying to essentially just like slow down the development of AI in China, after China sort of took the lead in the late 2017, 2018s, that effort has been largely successful. But it was sort of a window of opportunity. It was only for a time that we were able to do that, and I think the goal was somewhere between 3 and 10 years. And I think that we're basically at 6 or 7 years now. So it's sort of normal to see China come back and Huawei come back as one of China's main semiconductor companies, to compete against Nvidia and essentially sort of fill the gap that a lot of the Nvidia chips left because of export controls, right? You can't starve an economy like China of high-end AI chips, quote unquote, and hope that they're not going to come up with some kind of solution. Huawei was just like basically one of the best partners for the Chinese government to work with to try to catch up and fill that gap.
And this would fill the gap and catch up to Nvidia's most powerful chips, or no?
Eventually, perhaps. Right now, I don't think so. I think that right now we're really talking about the H20 chip, which was kind of Nvidia's answer to some of the export controls imposed by the U.S. But essentially, it competes more with the H100 series chips. So I think that Huawei is a very capable company. Obviously, they've had a few rough years. But with the help of the Chinese government, and also with the potential for demand that Nvidia can't fill because of those export controls in China, we could see an accelerated resurgence. So I think that the competition from Huawei isn't immediate. This isn't an immediate threat. This is more of a shot across the bow of Nvidia, and sort of a message, I think, from China that, hey, you want to play tariff games, you want to play export control games, we'll be back, and we'll be back soon.
For so long, Nvidia was the one to beat, and no one was even close. Obviously, Nvidia has fallen out of favor from a stock perspective when you take a look at year-to-date performance and percentage from the highs. But is that still the case? Is anyone close to catching up to Nvidia? We just had Ivan Feinseth on earlier in the show, and he said nobody is going to catch Nvidia.
I wouldn't say that nobody's going to catch Nvidia, but I would say that right now, no one really comes close. But competition is good, and competition is also good for Nvidia. So I know that Nvidia would love, or I'm assuming that Nvidia would love, to have this very high percentage of market share that it's enjoyed in the last few years. I don't think that's necessarily realistic in the long term. I don't think it's necessarily good in the long term. Competition is good for innovation. Competition is good for the entire ecosystem. So I don't see that as necessarily bad news for anybody. And I feel like Nvidia is in a strong enough position as sort of like where Apple used to be in tech for the semiconductor sector. I think that Nvidia still has a lot of cards to play, a lot of advantages to lean on. And so this might actually be good news for Nvidia. I know it's not a popular opinion, but it might not be a bad thing. And bear in mind that Nvidia's direct revenue from chip sales to China is roughly about 13, maybe 15% direct revenue, not counting the potential revenue from indirect sources. So it's not a huge chunk of Nvidia's business. So we're not, the sky isn't falling because of this announcement, right? But it does lean us towards perhaps adjusting expectations about Nvidia with regards to the Chinese market. But it's not the end of the world.
I was going to ask if China is more reliant on Nvidia, or if Nvidia is more reliant on China. So 13 to 15% of the revenue obviously isn't make or break, but what would your answer to that question be?
I think, that's a great question, but it's a question that applies to everybody and every company that uses NVIDIA chips. So I think it's a mutually beneficial market, right? NVIDIA benefits from everybody buying their chips and using CUDA, their software, and everybody also benefits from using sort of that top of the line technology and IP. So it's good for everybody. But the conditions for Huawei's return and their competitiveness in China specifically is kind of a direct result of these export controls that kept NVIDIA from essentially achieving more market share in the Chinese market. So we kind of created the situation because, again, I think the window of opportunity for the U.S. government and the U.S. economy was about 3 to 10 years, roughly like 6 to 7 realistically, to kind of gain an advantage over China and maintain that advantage for as much as possible. But now it was never supposed to be a permanent solution. So China was always going to push back and come up with their own chips. And unfortunately, NVIDIA kind of got in the middle of that.
Okay. All right. So many more follow-up questions, but we're out of time, so I have to come back.
All right.
Olivier Blanchard, Research Director, Futurum Group. Thanks so much.